My mother called me on a Tuesday morning, which should have been my first warning. She never calls on weekdays. She always said weekday mornings were for work and weekends were for family. That was her rule, not mine. I'd stopped living by her rules a long time ago. I picked up because I'm an idiot, or maybe because some part of me still hoped, even after everything, that one day she'd call just to say hi, just to ask how I was doing, not to ask for something. "Nadia," she said. Not "hey, sweetheart," not "how are you," just my name, flat and expectant, like I was already in trouble. "Mom, your father and I need to speak with you. This weekend, in person." I looked at my calendar. I had a client presentation on Saturday morning, a vendor meeting Saturday afternoon, and I'd been planning to spend Sunday finalizing a contract with the supplier I'd been courting for 3 months. I didn't have a weekend. I ran a business. I'd been running it for 6 years while my parents barely acknowledged it existed. "I can do a call Sunday evening," I said. Silence. "Then this isn't a phone conversation." And I should have said no. I should have said, "I'm sorry, I'm busy. Let's find another time," but I didn't. I drove 4 hours that Saturday after my presentation, eating gas station almonds and listening to a podcast about supply chain logistics, telling myself it was probably nothing. Maybe they needed help with something at the house. Maybe my dad's health. Something reasonable. It was not reasonable. Let me back up. Because to understand what happened that Saturday, you need to understand what my childhood was like. Not for sympathy, I'm past needing sympathy about it, but because context matters. Patterns matter. I am the older of 2 children. My brother is 4 years younger than me. His name is Kyle, and I love him, or I love the idea of him. The little kid version of him who used to fall asleep watching cartoons and needed me to tie his shoes. That Kyle, I have a lot of affection for. The adult version is a different story. Growing up, my parents had a very clear framework for how they saw us. I was capable. Kyle was sensitive. What that translated to in practice was I was expected to manage, and Kyle was expected to be managed. If I got a B, my mother would sit across from me at the kitchen table, arms folded, and say, "What happened? Not good job, not your trying, but what happened?" If Kyle forgot to hand in homework for 2 weeks straight, my mother would call his teacher and explain that he was going through a hard time. He was always going through a hard time. He was always going through a hard time. I was never allowed to be going through a hard time. My dad was gentler, but not different. He put his arm around Kyle and say things like, "He'll find his way." He never said that about me. About me, he'd say things like, "Nadia knows what she's doing," which sounds like a compliment. It wasn't. It was a way of opting out. It was a way of opting out. It was a way of saying, "You don't need us, so we won't offer." By the time I was 18, I had a part-time job, a savings account my parents didn't know about, and the plan. I was going to put myself through school, and I was going to build something, and it wasn't going to have anything to do with anyone who'd spent my entire childhood treating self-sufficiency as a personality flaw. I got a scholarship that covered 60%. I waitressed through the rest. I graduated with a degree in graphic design and a minor in business, and then I worked for an agency for 2 years while I saved, and then I quit and started my own studio. It was terrifying. I won't pretend otherwise. There were months in year 1 where I paid my rent and had about $40 left for groceries, and I ate a lot of rice and beans and watched a lot of free YouTube tutorials on things I couldn't afford to pay someone else to do. My parents knew I'd started the business. My mother said, "Is that practical?" My father said, "You sure about that?" Neither of them offered help. Neither of them asked how it was going. Kyle, meanwhile, had moved back home at 23 after a job didn't work out. Then another job didn't work out. Then another job didn't work out. My parents floated him, paid his car insurance, his phone, let him live rent-free. When I mentioned once, carefully, gently, that maybe it would help Kyle to have more financial responsibility, my mother looked at me like I'd suggested something cruel. "Not everyone is like you," she said. I stopped mentioning it. By year 3, my studio had 5 clients. By year 4, I had a small team, 2 full-time designers and a part-time project manager. By year 5, we were doing well enough that I moved into a real office space instead of the second bedroom of my apartment. By year 6, the year before my mother called on that Tuesday morning, I had 11 employees, a client list I was genuinely proud of, and a profit margin that meant I could finally stop doing the mental math every time I bought something. I had built this. From nothing. From rice and beans and $40 weeks and watching YouTube tutorials at midnight, no investment from my parents, no help, no interest, really. My mother came to my office once, looked around, said it was cute, and asked if I'd eaten lunch. So that's the context, that's the pattern. Now I'll tell you what happened on that Saturday. I arrived at my parents' house around 4 in the afternoon. My dad was in the kitchen. He hugged me, but it was the kind of hug that's also an apology. And I felt the apology before he said a word. My mother was in the living room, sitting very straight in the chair she always sits straight in, and Kyle was on the couch, and that's when I knew. The fact that Kyle was there. Kyle was never there for normal Saturday visits. Kyle being there meant this was staged. "Sit down, honey," my mother said. I sat. She folded her hands, which is what she does before she delivers a verdict, and she said, "We've been talking as a family, and we think it's time you gave Kyle a real role in your business." I heard the words. I understood each one individually. Together, they made no sense. "What?" I said. "He's your brother," my dad said from the doorway. "You've done so well. It would be good for him to have something stable. Kyle hasn't worked in." I stopped. "What kind of role?" My mother smiled, which was worse than if she hadn't. "We think a partnership makes sense. 25%. And if you could help him get set up somewhere decent, he's 30 now, he needs his own space. We were thinking you could co-sign on a condo or gift him the down payment. You can afford it." The room was very quiet. I looked at Kyle. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the carpet, which told me everything. He knew this was wrong. He knew it, and he'd let them do it anyway. "You're asking me to give my brother a quarter of my business," I said, slowly, making sure every word landed exactly where it was supposed to. "A business I started alone, that I have funded alone, that I have run alone for 6 years, and to buy him a condo." "Gift him the down payment," my mother corrected. "You'd be co-signing." "Mom, you have the means, Nadia. I worked for the means, Nadia. I worked for the means, and Kyle has had a harder time." "Not everyone." "Don't say it." I held up my hand. "Don't say not everyone is like me." "I know that's what you were going to say. You've been saying it my whole life. But do you understand what you're actually asking me? You're asking me to hand over part of a company that I built from nothing to someone who has never expressed any interest in what I do, who doesn't have a design background, who has never worked in a creative field, who has never, not once, asked me how things were going. You're asking me to dilute ownership of something I sacrificed for years, while you were paying Kyle's phone bill." My mother's face did the thing it does when she's deciding whether to be wounded or angry. She went with wounded. "That's not fair," she said. "We supported you too." "How?" I asked. I didn't ask it meanly. I asked it genuinely, because I actually wanted to know. What was the math? What was the support I'd received that I'd somehow miscounted? She didn't have an answer. My dad tried. "We always believed in you. Belief isn't money, Dad. Belief isn't a co-signed loan or a free place to live at 23 or someone paying your car insurance. I'm not saying you did anything wrong by helping Kyle. I'm saying you can't now ask me to hand him something I built because you helped him and not me. Those aren't the same." Kyle finally looked up. He had the decency to look ashamed, which I gave him credit for. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "I want you to know that. I didn't ask them to do this." "I know," I said. And I believed him, which honestly made it worse. Because it meant my parents had cooked this up on their own. It meant they sat around the kitchen table and looked at what I had built, and their first thought was how it could benefit someone else. "We're a family," my mother said. Her voice had shifted. The wounded tone was gone. What replaced it was something I hadn't heard before, not directed at me, and I recognized it because I had heard her use it on other people. Contractors who hadn't done what she wanted, neighbors she felt had slighted her. It was the tone she used when she'd decided you owed her something and she intended to collect. Families share. Families help each other. "You're right," I said. "They do. Where was the family when I was eating rice and beans 3 times a day trying to make payroll? Where was the family when I needed a professional reference and Dad said he didn't want to get involved? Where was the family when I asked, once, for a $5,000 loan that I explicitly said I would pay back with interest and you said you didn't feel comfortable mixing money and family?" That landed. I watched it land. That was different, my mother said, but her voice was thinner. Why? Because it was me asking? Or because it was my money then, not Kyle's? If you don't do this, she said, and her voice went very quiet, very controlled, we will have to reconsider things. As a family. I looked at her. What does that mean? It means that if you can't act like part of this family, we will need to evaluate what that means for our relationship. And there it was, the ultimatum. You give your brother a share of what you built, or you're out. I'd always wondered, in the abstract, what I would feel if this moment ever came. I'd imagined anger, or grief, or panic. What I actually felt was something calmer than any of those. It was closer to clarity. Like someone had turned on the light in a room I'd been trying to navigate in the dark. Okay, I said. My mother blinked. Okay, you'll do it. Okay, I understand. I picked up my bag. I need to think. I drove home. And I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad. I was. Somewhere underneath everything. A specific kind of sad that I think only makes sense if you've ever had to grieve a relationship that wasn't what you needed it to be. But because I'd been doing the emotional version of this drive my entire life, I'd been driving home from their house, absorbing something, recalibrating. I knew how to do this. When I got home, I called my lawyer. Her name is Priya, and she is methodical and unflappable, and I've worked with her since year 2 of the business. I told her what had happened. She asked a few questions. Then she said, we should review your operating agreement and make sure there's nothing that could create exposure, and I'd recommend documenting this conversation. I took notes in the car, I said. Good, she said. Keep them. Then I called my accountant. Same deal. I walked him through the conversation and we talked about what, if anything, my parents might have standing to claim based on my corporate structure. Nothing, it turned out. I formed an LLC. I was the sole member. There was no provision for family claims. There was nothing. But I wanted to hear it. I wanted to be sure. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and I thought very carefully about what I wanted, not what I was supposed to want, not what a good daughter would want. Would I, Nadia, 32 years old, sole founder of a design studio that I had built from nothing, actually wanted? I wanted it to stop. I wanted to stop being the capable one who didn't need anything while my brother got to be sensitive and get supported. I wanted to stop having the math of my parents' affection constantly calculated against me. I wanted to stop being asked to subsidize choices I had no part in making. I wanted a family that saw what I built and said, we're proud of you instead of what can you give us. I couldn't have that family. I understood that now, fully, without the grain of hope I'd been carrying around for years like a pebble in a shoe. The family I wanted didn't exist. What I could do was protect what I had. I called my mother 2 days later. I'd written down what I wanted to say, not because I'd read it from the paper, but because writing it helped me know it. I knew it when I picked up the phone. I've thought about what you asked, I said. And? She sounded careful. I'm not going to give Kyle a share of the business. I'm not going to gift him a down payment. I'm not going to co-sign on anything. I paused. I want to be clear that this isn't anger talking. This isn't a reaction. I've thought about this carefully and the answer is no, because what you're asking isn't fair and you know it isn't fair. Nadia, I'm not finished. Nadia, I've not finished to her before. I love you. I love Dad. I want a relationship with my family. But that relationship has to be honest, and right now it's not. What you asked me to do on Saturday wasn't a family conversation. It was an ambush. And the fact that you framed walking away from it as me leaving the family, that's not love, Mom. That's leverage. And I'm not going to respond to leverage. Silence. If you want to talk, I said, about what an actual relationship between us looks like, one where I'm not being asked to compensate for 30 years of unequal treatment, I'm willing to have that conversation. But not on those terms. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, you've always thought you were better than us. It hurt. It was designed to hurt. I let it hurt for exactly as long as it took me to breathe in and out. I don't think that, I said. I think I've worked very hard and I've protected what I built, and I don't think that makes me better. I think it makes me someone who knows her own worth. I hung up. My dad texted me 3 days later, not a call, a text, which was very him. We miss you. I hope we can figure this out. I texted back, I hope so too, Dad. When you're ready to talk, I'm here. He didn't respond after that. Not yet. Kyle called me on a Thursday, about a week after. He said he was embarrassed. He said he was embarrassed. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know they were going to do that, and I believed him, and I told him so. I told him I didn't hold it against him, and I didn't. But I also told him that I couldn't keep absorbing the dynamics of our family on his behalf, that if he wanted a real relationship with me, it had to be a relationship between us, not one filtered through what our parents had decided I owed him. He said that was fair. He sounded like he meant it. I genuinely hope he did. I won't tell you this all resolved itself neatly because it hasn't. My relationship with my parents is paused, I suppose, is the right word. Not severed, not healed. I'm not interested in dramatic endings. I'm not interested in revenge. What I'm interested in is a life where the things I built are mine, where the boundaries I draw are respected, and where the people around me understand that love is not a transaction and family is not a claim. I had a meeting with my team last week, my 11 people in the office that is mine, and I looked around the room at the work we've made together and I felt, not pride, exactly, because pride has a performance quality to it I've never quite trusted. I felt something more private, more settled. Like, this is real. This is the thing I made while no one was watching, and it belongs to me. You can love people and refuse to be diminished by them. You can grieve a family while protecting yourself from it. You can hold the door open and still require that anyone who walks through it treats you like you deserve to be treated. I had to build that the same way I built everything else, alone, carefully, without anyone showing me how. But I built it. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not the ultimatum, not the drive home, not even the phone call where I finally said no. It's smaller than all of that. It's the image of Kyle looking at the carpet while my mother delivered her verdict, knowing it was wrong and saying nothing. That image taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. The people who stay silent while you're being wronged are participating in it, even when they feel bad about it. Feeling bad doesn't cost anything. Speaking up does. I used to think that what I needed to do, what a good person would do, was keep the door open no matter what. Stay patient. Stay warm. Don't make it worse. And I do think there's something right about that instinct. But I confused it with something it isn't. Keeping the door open doesn't mean standing in the doorway while someone walks through you. There's a version of patience that's actually just fear wearing a polite face. I lived inside that version for a long time. What changed for me, and I mean genuinely changed, not just intellectually understood but felt, was realizing that the way I'd built my business was the same way I needed to build my life. When I started the studio, I had nothing. No safety net, no investors, no one telling me I was doing the right thing. I had to think clearly about every decision because there was no margin for magical thinking. I couldn't afford to pretend a bad contract would work out fine. I couldn't afford to ignore the numbers because I liked someone. I had to be honest constantly, even when honesty was inconvenient. Somewhere along the way, I'd applied that same rigor to my work and completely abandoned it when it came to my family. I'd let myself believe things that the evidence didn't support, that my parents would eventually see me clearly, that the dynamic would shift, that love, eventually, would be enough to correct the imbalance. None of that was thinking. It was hoping, and hoping is not a strategy. The call I made to Priya the night I drove home wasn't just a legal precaution. It was a decision to think about my own life with the same clear-headedness I'd spent 6 years applying to my business. To look at what was actually happening instead of what I wished was happening. That clarity, that willingness to see things as they are, is what let me walk into the conversation with my mother without crumbling. I wasn't angry, I was just honest. And then there's the part nobody really talks about, which is that doing the right thing is often just hard. Not dramatic, not triumphant. Just hard and unglamorous and quiet. I didn't feel like I'd won anything when I hung up that phone. I felt the weight of it. I felt the specific sadness of understanding that the family you needed and the family you have are not the same thing. Sitting with that, without softening it with excuses or bitterness, took something out of me. But it also left something behind, a kind of steadiness that I don't think I could have found any other way. You don't get that steadiness handed to you. You build it the same way you build anything worth keeping, through choices that cost you something, made honestly, one at a time.